So I love the correlation, Anthony, between the astronomy and the constellations of what we have described as animal figures, like the swan, and how it relates to the sites that you were explaining. And speaking of swans, there's something, it comes to mind that you wrote a book recently called The Cry of the Sebak, which relates to, it means, translates as hawk, isn't that right?
Yeah.
So would you like to go into that a little bit? What significance does the hawk have with the stories?
The hawk is an important creature of mythology, mainly sort of exemplified by the story of Fintan Mac Bóchra. And that was the myth that actually inspired the novel, The Cry of the Sebak. So yeah, there were certain creatures that seemed to have importance. The importance of the hawk appears to be one that's connected with wisdom and, you know, the survival of myth. The story is, I think, corrupted perhaps a little bit by Christian hands, in that it stems from the Laura Gowalla, the Book of Invasions, or the Book of the Takings of Ireland, which describes the various events and waves of incursions that have happened over history. So there's, you know, everything from the Partholonians and the Nemedians and the Tuatha Dan and the Firbulg, the Fomorians, the Milesians, all that stuff. But it all begins apparently with the Great Flood. And this is the flood of the Bible, the flood of Noah and Noah's Ark. And Noah's granddaughter, Kezer, who is refused a place on the Ark, decides to flee to Ireland. And she comes with, there are 3 males in the party and 50 women. And she flees to Ireland, according to the story, because Ireland is basically devoid of human life, and therefore it is basically free of sin and not subject to God's destructive judgment upon mankind. Because in this, you know, even in other versions of the Noah's Ark myth from around the world, it is seen as a punishment upon people, as a judgment, you know, from some greater power. So she comes to Ireland. Anyway, the long and short of the story is that Ireland is flooded and all of the women are drowned and 2 of the men. And Fintan is the lone survivor. And he takes, as the waters overtake him, on a hill called Tultinja, which is, again, I think is in County Tipperary. He changes into a salmon and survives in the water, first as a salmon, and then transforms into an eagle, and then into a hawk. Okay. And I think this is, I personally think it's fascinating anyway, that he is a changeling, you know, and that he changes into various creatures. And the salmon obviously being a very important creature in Irish myth through the salmon of knowledge. But as a hawk, he is seen also in the story of the Hawk of Achill. But in the Cry of the Sebak, I describe it basically what is a talking bird. So the bird is able to communicate with a human boy, but the bird isn't necessarily moving its beak and speaking, as it were, but he's speaking into the boy's mind and they have a conversation. What the hawk represents, I think, most of all, and Fintan as a character represents the survival of wisdom and the survival of the core of myth through all of the disasters that happen to mankind. Okay. That it's important that we retain our mythologies through all disasters because they will serve us. Right. I think that's what its core message is, the core message of the story. So for instance, there's a story called The Settling of the Manor of Tara, in which the people, the subjects of the king, become a little bit confused as to why he has so much land. And who is it decides how much land the king gets? And so they consult all sorts of wise men and oracles and all the rest, and nobody's able to answer the question. And eventually they resort to talking to Fintan Mac Bóchra. And Fintan, before he tells them anything, tells them that he has lived for 5,000 years. That really he is the embodiment of the survival of wisdom from a time before we can actually remember. And he tells them, in a very straightforward manner, he basically reminds them that they've just forgotten that it hasn't been actually laid down in a particular book or in a particular decree. Mm-hmm. It's just that they've forgotten. So what he's done is he's just refreshed them. He's brought their minds into a state of awareness about stuff that they thought they'd forgotten, but in fact they haven't. And to me, that's his core symbolism, is that myth, and the power of myth is that it is able to awaken something within us, something that's latent, but it is something that is part of our shared human experience. And in the Jungian sphere, perhaps something in the collective unconscious, that we think we're individuals, but perhaps we're connected by common threads. And the common threads, I think, in some cases are the themes or the deeper purpose of mythology, which is to guide us in our lives and to help us to live sort of truer existences.